Welcome to our program today on human trafficking and domestic violence. We're going to talk with people from two different organizations in the Philadelphia area. I'm your host, Rosemary Barbera. I'm the chair and the BSW program director in the Department of Social Work at Salle. First, today, we're going to talk with our guests from the Salvation Army about human trafficking in our area, particularly in Philadelphia. And later in the second half of our show, we'll talk with members of Laurel House about domestic violence. Let's meet our first guests, Katina Stoffler and Sarah Colton from the Salvation Army's New Day Drop-In Center in Kensington. Katrina and Sarah, please tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you got into this work, and what you do at the New Day Drop-In Center.
I'm Katrina. I'm the program manager at the New Day Drop-In Center. I got started in this work it was actually about 10 years ago now, in 2011, and I started as a volunteer. So I'm also really passionate about kind of the next, generation and cohort of volunteers and interns here. But yeah, I started as a volunteer. The Drop-In Center was very different back in those days. We were a really small kind of grassroots volunteer run kind of project operating with a lot of support from a couple of different organizations. And I've been really thankful and blessed to stay with the Salvation Army through a couple of other, internships, and then, being hired full time to stick with the Drop-In Center, watch it grow over the years. And now I'm able to kind of support the day-to-day operations and the just kind of like long-term, kind of visioning for the program. So yeah, I kind of on a daily, I'm here at the Drop-In supporting staff, serving the women, kind of just ensuring that everyone here has what they need to do their jobs effectively and to support the folks that we serve.
Great. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background in terms of like where you studied and what you studied?
Sure. Yeah, I did my bachelor's in social work at Eastern University, and then I got a master's in social work at Bryn Mawr College. So I was able to do some clinical and generalist internships here at the Drop-In and in the Salvation Army's other anti-trafficking programs as well.
Great, thanks. Sarah, go ahead, your turn.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am a milieu worker at the New Day Drop-In Center. Pretty much my role is to make sure that the Drop-In Center is running smoothly, that the clients are having all their needs met, especially if a woman comes in crisis. I'm one of the first people that the client sees when they walk in the door, hooking them up with case management, making sure they have clothing, food, hygiene products, just pretty much being the front person as soon as the women walk in, trying to support them in any way, notice any signs of human and sex trafficking or any signs of domestic violence, and pretty much just making sure all their needs are met as soon as they walk in the door and make them feel welcome.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Sarah is also a student in our BSW program, her final class. She's in that right now. And so we're really happy to have you both in our program and then also on this program. So that's really cool. Thanks for that double duty you're doing here for us. We do understand issues of confidentiality and anonymity that are critically important, right? This is a very vulnerable population, lots of, abuse that's involved. And so we understand you can't share any personal information about the people you work with or any identifying information at all. But I wonder if you could tell us a story, a composite or something that give us kind of an idea of what the lives are like of the people you work with and kind of what brought them to this point in their life and what their dreams are, or what their dreams were, and, then what they're thinking about the future.
Sure. Yeah. And I appreciate you kind of mentioning that little caveat there. But, kind of a typical way that, everyone's story here is really different. And so we do find that as we get to know folks, that folks are coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different levels of education or different family dynamics, and even different places in the country and in the world. and finding their way here to Philadelphia and here to Kensington. But, you know, a story that we kind of hear somewhat typically is of, you know, a child, you know, maybe like about somewhere between the ages of like 14 and 17 or 18, ends up getting recruited at school. Maybe they had a history of some childhood sexual abuse, or there was some violence in the home, or an involvement in, you know, child welfare services and some like out of home placements. So, you know, kind of that teenager then has sort of found themselves in a situation where maybe they've run away from home, or they get recruited at school, or, you know, at another place where youth kind of might hang out, by maybe an older person approaches them and says, you know, hey, I have, you know, either like a job for you, or we can, you know, I want to be your partner and we can take care of each other. You know, you're so beautiful. I see you and I know what's going on at home and I can take care of you. You don't need all that stress and all that drama in your life. You know, sometimes it's an older person who does that recruiting, or sometimes they might send another teen to recruit another teen. And so teens might even hear it from each other, like, oh, you can come and stay with me and my, you know, boyfriend or partner or something like that, and run away from home and get out of that situation. So sometimes, you know, it kind of can start like that. And then, you know, folks find, you know, at first maybe it feels like a relationship and something that is, you know, sort of going both ways. And then after not too long, sometimes it turns into this pressure to have sex, and trade sex for money or for other things of value, and pretty quickly turns into sometimes a situation of violence or even psychological coercion, that sort of keeps these, you know, young people in the grips of this, you know, human trafficking experience. You know, fast forward then, you know, 10 to 15 years, and a lot of the population that we serve here at the Drop-In Center is kind of more in that age range of like in their 30s, 40s. But they have, you know, if you get to know them and learn a little bit more about their story, we're oftentimes finding that this experience of exploitation or involvement in the sex industry oftentimes started back when they were 16, 17, you know, maybe into their 20s. But for a lot of them, it did start when they were young, pretty young. So they may have had a similar story to that, like how I shared, or, you know, they may have had something else, you know, come up where even like their family themselves was involved in human trafficking, and that was kind of their entry into the, I guess, into the issue, if you will. And so, like I said, fast forward, you know, 15 to 20 years, and these folks are maybe in their 30s and 40s, still dealing with this today. So to the random kind of passerby or citizens, you know, sort of strolling through our neighborhood, you know, there can be a lot of assumptions about who is out here on the street and what they see and what they believe those people to be doing. And, you know, oftentimes we hear that, you know, there's a stigma, right? That folks think that a woman or a person out, you know, engaging in commercial sex is out there to feed a drug habit, is kind of a lot of the language that people will use. But, you know, as you get to know folks and learn a little bit more, like I said, we've discovered that a lot of them started out in this when they were teens, when they were young enough to be considered a victim of trafficking. And so regardless of whether or not they have a pimp or a trafficker now controlling that situation, we've often found that they have in the past. And they even may more recently have had a pimp or a trafficker who, you know, maybe isn't violent, and maybe is, but maybe isn't, you know, violent or that, you know, outright about how they're exploiting them. But they might say, you can stay here and have a warm place to sleep for the night if you bring me back, you know, $50 or whatever. And they know that the only way they're going to bring that money back is by engaging in commercial sex. So there can be this, it can be very easy to exploit this population once they've gotten to this point where they have, you know, maybe a criminal record, they have a couple of years of substance use disorder, a lot of trauma and different things that they've endured, and this kind of chronic homelessness. So then they have, you know, just several vulnerabilities now that can be easily exploited, that really keeps them here, keeps them on the streets, and keeps them, you know, open to that exploitation. Because who doesn't need a warm place to stay out here? Who doesn't need a meal to eat? And so a trafficker can see that and can really kind of use that to coerce a person to keep doing dates and to keep, exchanging sex for these things that they need.
I think that's very powerful what you just said about who doesn't need a warm place to sleep and a warm meal or a meal in general, right? Because that is just so basic to our lives in general for all of us. While you were speaking, Katrina, I was thinking of a book by Dr. Monique Morris called Push Out. And there's also a documentary by the same name. And what Dr. Monique Morris did was she looked at the school to prison pipeline and so much focus, right, about how kids who get separated from the school system oftentimes end in prison, particularly kids of color, right? We know that, and that, Black boys the police are called on them, and for white boys and white girls for that matter, they go to the principal's office, etc. But what Dr. Morris saw was that so much of the research is done on boys. And so her research is on girls. And for me, I read her book when it first came out a couple of years ago. One of the most powerful things is she talked about going from school to school to school, looking at dress codes. And the dress codes in schools are much more restrictive for girls than they are for boys. And she said the number of girls who get sent home for dress code violations and then get approached by a trafficker on their way home. Like they're just outside the schools waiting for something like that to happen. And if a girl has been having some trouble in school, she's more, open to kind of other alternatives. And it just kind of blew me away, but it makes sense in many ways.
Sure. And they will also, traffickers will wait outside of youth placements and youth shelters. Like they know where vulnerable people are, and they know where the group homes are at. They find out through the youth, they exploit kind of that vulnerability. They find out where to find other youth. And so they'll wait outside of shelters, they'll wait outside of group homes or any kind of place where, youth are hanging out.
And you also talked about violence, right? And I think, that not all of I guess their relationships, right? Relationships can be healthy and unhealthy. So, not all of them have physical violence, but certainly we've got emotional violence and psychological violence and financial violence, economic violence as well, right? In these situations. And, and that gets internalized, I would imagine, right? Do you see people coming in kind of with having internalized those messages about themselves and their worthiness and, what they have to put up with in order to survive or in order to be loved even? Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about a day in the life of the DropIn Center?
So a day in the life in the DropIn Center right now, it looks a little different because of COVID. But as soon as the women walk in, they get greeted. Right now, we do temperature checks. And we ask them if the first thing is, what would you like to eat? And we heat them up a nice warm meal. Some of them might have a place to stay so they can take the frozen meal with them and heat it up on their own. But most of them, we take care of them right away. Would you like coffee? Would you like something to eat? And then after we sign them in our program system, we ask them what size clothing they are. And we do our best with the donations that we receive through the DropIn, through, outside sources, just people in the community wanting to give back. And we allow them to pick their own outfits, give them autonomy, because they might not have had a chance before to pick out their clothing, to pick out their color underwear. And for the women that we serve, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to be able to voice what you like and what you don't like and just be comfortable. Many women, as soon as they walk in, are so grateful just to have clothing, just to have food, just to have someone actually care about them and see past whatever situation they're currently in. We did have showers at a time. We hope to open them again. With COVID, it's a little difficult because we are such a small enclosed building, but we let them get showers. They can go in the kitchen and have food and just hang out. We have couches and a TV in the front where they could just sit down. They could stay the whole day if they wanted to. Just give them a safe place to just relax. Some of them haven't slept for days, and they will just sit on the couch and just fall asleep. And, we just try to make them as comfortable as they can be. A lot of them, as soon as they walk in, I ask them, you ever need case management? We're here. We can support you. We're not just here for food and clothing. Like if you need an ID, housing, anything, we are right here for you to support you in any way. And many of the women don't have any support systems. They're very vulnerable. They feel like, they're already down and people in the community keep kicking them down. So when they come into the New Day Drop-In Center, we're that support system. If they don't have family, we're that family for them. And it really means a lot to the women. And it always pulls on my heartstrings when they leave the building, because, you look forward to them coming back the next day. But in this community, in this neighborhood, and how everything's going with, just human trafficking, addiction, it's nerve-wracking not knowing if you'll be able to see that individual the next day or the next week. But meeting them where they are is what we do in Kensington, and meeting their basic needs. I mean, Rosie, you said it perfectly well, and Katrina, that a place to sleep is a basic need. It's a necessity. And many people don't have that. They don't have their basic needs met, especially in the area of Kensington. So when they come into the drop-in, we meet those basic needs. And if they need additional support, we can refer them to other places as well, if it's something out of our spectrum. But we're there to support the ladies the moment they walk into the drop-in center.
And, and actually, I'm so glad you kind of focused on that a little bit too, because they're not just needs. I should have said this, right? Given that so much of my work is around human rights, they're human rights, right? The right to housing, the right to food. These are all things that are in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the United States is a signatory to, one of the charter signatories from December 10th, 1948. And so these are things you're offering to help fulfill these people's human rights, and also human right, in terms of just connection to other human beings, right? So you talked about, a lot of times nobody asks them what they like, what they want, or just listening, right? Those things are just so powerful and can mean so much in someone's mind, in someone's life. And then I was thinking, Sarah, when you said, there's a contradiction there, like you want to see them tomorrow, you're not sure. And at the same time, you kind of want them to come back because you want them to get services and help. But wouldn't it be great if they didn't have to come back?
Yeah.
Like that's what you're kind of probably constantly dealing with, right? So, do you all have any kind of like the situation in Philadelphia, any kind of statistics or anything that you have seen in terms of, how the situation is presently? Has it been changing?
Yeah, sure. So statistics can be a little bit tricky with human trafficking, of course, because, like with other crimes that folks are involved in there, we suspect that there's a lot of underreporting. There's, there's even just kind of that dynamic where like someone who's a victim of a crime doesn't always know that what they're experiencing is illegal and is a crime. Particularly with human trafficking, the trafficker can, oftentimes use a lot of different kind of control tactics to try to convince the trafficker that they've made the choice to do this and that they're the ones choosing to stay. So that can, be a little complicated. But all that to say, I could really, digress about that for a while. So there are some, like kind of reliable sources, and I would just point folks to like the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, Polaris. They do a lot of like data collection, and they run a national hotline. So they have some pretty good data as far as like, what kind of calls come in across the country. Here in Kensington, I can say that, before COVID, we were serving just at a really fast pace, we were serving anywhere from 85 to 120 different unique individual women on a given day. And like hundreds per month. So one single woman could come in multiple times in a day, but this is really speaking to like, that's not duplicated. So that's not counting that person more than once. So just individual women, we would serve like up to 120 per day. And I think, like hundreds and hundreds like over the year. Now that it's been COVID, we have served since the new year, we've served 216 unique individual women. And each day that we're here, we find a couple of new faces. So almost every single day and at least every week, there is someone who's new to the neighborhood or new to us at least. Maybe they didn't know about the drop-in center. Maybe they were arrested for a while and then they sort of, got out and they found their way here. But so whatever the circumstances, we're always engaging with a lot of our continuing folks, and we're always meeting someone new. So that number just keeps growing. Kind of on a daily here, we serve about 20 to 40 women on a day. Ever since kind of the COVID restrictions caused us to sort of decrease our capacity in the building. But we are really hoping to, move, back towards what our old normal used to be, as maybe we develop, some immunity and think about, how to do things a little bit more safely. But that's, and that really kind of also leads to your question about like the situation in Philly. And obviously COVID has caused quite a bunch of changes, and can complicate things for victims in, pretty extreme ways. So a lot of our folks, like Sarah said, don't have a place to sleep. They don't have regular access to meals. And so with COVID causing a lot of resources to shut down, folks are stuck in their situations of exploitation and they're not able to get access to as many resources. So we've really been trying to continue to like expand and increase our outreach here, especially as we've been able to reopen. The other issue that, is a dynamic everywhere, but I would say especially here in Kensington where we serve, is the opioid epidemic and how intertwined that is with the issue of human trafficking. There is this dynamic where a trafficker or someone exploiting a person can use a person's dependence on substances to keep them in control. So, especially with heroin and opioids, there's a physical dependence that comes along with that and a physical sickness that happens when the person doesn't have access to the substance or to the drug for a certain amount of time. So a trafficker can say, sometimes traffickers will be their drug dealer and their, sex trafficker at the same time, and they will control their access to substances in order to keep them engaged and keep them doing the dates and bringing in the money. After maybe they've collected a certain amount of money, then they'll give them just enough of the opioids or whatever they need to not feel sick, and to not go into withdrawal. So we see a lot of overlap here with opioids and exploitation. So I would say that, as far as like, what's the situation in Philly, that is definitely having an impact. And then just the last thing, like New Day has a lot of other programs as well. So the DropIn Center is kind of how we got our start. But since then we've expanded around the city and even into Montgomery County. We have a residential program. We have mobile case management. We also support youth who are court involved and may have either dependency cases or delinquency cases. And we support them if they have been identified as victims of trafficking. So we work with minors. We also work with, men, women, and children. So even though our center here is focused on female identifying folks, we will serve foreign national victims of trafficking. We'll serve folks who don't have the English language proficiency. We'll serve, men who have been labor trafficked. We also have a police-assisted diversion program that started I think it's in its second year now. So that, we have a couple of different things going on in the city now. So although what we're speaking to is really what we do at the DropIn Center, New Day is serving victims in a lot of other capacities as well throughout the city.
And New Day is the larger program of the Salvation Army?
So the Salvation Army is our like kind of larger like parent organization. So we are a Salvation Army social ministry. And then New Day to Stop Trafficking is the kind of umbrella of anti-trafficking programs.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm sorry. I should have said that.
Sure.
That earlier.
That's okay. And I should have probably been more clear too to introduce, that the Salvation Army is the agency kind of sustaining this work.
So, and actually, I'm glad kind of you brought up the thing in terms of different languages and people coming from different places, because I jotted down a note from earlier about that, right? Mm-hmm. So, like Sarah, like where are people coming from? Like the people that are coming in, are they, that we probably have a population from Philadelphia, but where else are people arriving to in Kensington, and if you know about other parts of the Philadelphia region?
When the women come to the drop-in, some of them are from the Philadelphia area or the surrounding suburbs. like, Bucks County, Levittown, but there are quite a few that come from different states. We've had women come in from Maryland, Delaware, Florida, and they simply come down here and they get stuck. And then they have to survive the streets of Kensington, not knowing resources, not having support, not knowing anybody. And then right there is a red flag for us because we want to give them extra support. But it's also something that a trafficker will see and use. And because it makes them even more vulnerable because they don't know anybody, they don't have anybody. And you'll see them walking through the streets of Kensington with suitcases. They simply were not, weren't planning to stay here, but they've accumulated things from the resources that they finally did see, like the New Day Drop-In Center or Prevention Point, for example. And we work together as organizations to make sure that we're reaching out to the female identifying individuals that are in Kensington. So many of them, their parents don't know where they are. Their family doesn't know where they are. They don't even know where they are because they simply just got stuck down here. And there's just so many. I mean, I've never realized how bad the human and sex trafficking was in Philadelphia until I started this job. And I don't think a lot of people in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania or any of the surrounding areas realize how bad it is, not just the opioid epidemic, but human and sex trafficking, and how all of the resources that they're lacking because they just simply don't have access to it, that makes them more of a target for people that are looking to physically, mentally, financially, emotionally control an individual so they can have their needs met. Right. Not caring about the individual that they're using and abusing. But there's many, there's so many coming from out of state that just get stuck down here.
Right. And there's so much. We only have a couple of minutes left. I can't believe the time has gone so quickly. And, I was thinking, when you were both talking, we talked about the physical, emotional, psychological, economic violence, and then the control, right? The control that goes with that. They kind of go hand in hand. But in the minute and a half, 2 minutes we have left, just want to ask you if you would let us know kind of what signs should we look for as the public? And then what can we do or how can we get involved?
Sarah, do you want to take the signs and I'll share how folks can get involved?
Yeah. So a lot of them are changes in behavior, isolation, not speaking for themselves, not really knowing what they even want because they're always in the back of their head thinking well, is this what I want? Or is this what I'm supposed to be saying? Or is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Because they're so mentally controlled. Reports of abortions, sexually transmitted infections and diseases, unexplained cash or high-priced items, involvement in the commercial sex industry, like stripping, pornography, exchanging sex for something of value to them, branding tattoos.
So that'll be someone might get a tattoo, like a trafficker might tattoo all of his victims with the same type of tattoo to kind of indicate that that's who they belong to. That's what she means by branding.
To mark them, right. And you would think of that when you not that it's right, but brand animals, and that's just.
Or the Holocaust. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the Holocaust. Other things too, incarceration and all sorts of things, but the way peoples are branded. So we're really really short. So I don't know if Sarah, if you could talk a little bit about how we can get involved. Katrina.
Sure. Yeah. So there's just a couple of things. We're always looking for folks who want to get involved and use their passions to support this work. So whether that means, donating, we do take, donations of gently used or new women's clothing, new, socks and underwear. That is the biggest deal to someone to just get a new outfit some days. We'll take hygiene products, and especially during the pandemic, we'll take cleaning supplies and PPE for staff and for the women who participate. We also accept monetary donations, so folks can always reach out to us if they're interested in that. We also have, opportunities for volunteering and internships. So anyone who's a BSW or MSW student and is interested in getting some of their, clinical experience or their foundation year placement done at the Drop-In Center, just reach out to us. We are always interested in, I think we have a lot of good opportunities for interns. That's how I started as well here. And then for volunteering, we're starting to resume in-person volunteering this month in May. So if anyone was interested in volunteering, they can always reach out. We do have a training that folks need to attend, and there's some clearances, but I can always update a person on that. And then if someone is just concerned about human trafficking that is happening in their area and they want to make a tip, or they're not sure what to do or how to help a friend who they think is involved, they can call the national hotline, which is 888-373-7888. And, they will be able to support and offer resources, and if necessary, route that phone call as well to law enforcement for further investigation. So it's always good to, I encourage everyone to just save that number in their phone if you're interested and passionate about supporting survivors.
Great, thanks. And thanks for mentioning about interns, right? Because that's a thing that people are always looking for. And, we're starting in it. We have a BSW program. We're starting in a Master of Social Work program now in August. And so we're always looking for sites. I want to thank you both so much for spending this time with us and sharing. There's so much more we could talk about, but sharing your knowledge, your passion, and letting us know the stories and helping us kind of understand this really kind of atrocious situation in many ways, right? And heart-wrenching situation that so many people are living through. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
For having us.
The Salvation Army's New Day Drop-In Center provides a consistent, safe, welcoming, and trauma-informed environment for women exploited by the commercial sex industry in the Kensington neighborhood of North Philadelphia. If you are interested in donating to the center or becoming a volunteer, you can call their office at 267-886-8395. You can also email them at newdaydropin@gmail.com. If you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, call the national hotline at 888-373-7888. Or you can call the New Day Anti-Trafficking Hotline at 267-838-5866.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our program. For the second part of today's program, we'll be talking with some folks from Laurel House, an organization that works with survivors of domestic violence and that is working to end domestic violence. We have with us today Melinda Faison she is a community housing manager at Laurel House, and we have Tasia Scott, a student social worker, an intern, and a BSW student at LaSalle University. So welcome. If you could please just tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got into this work.
My name is Melinda Faison. I am a master's level social worker at Laurel House, and I've been here just about 4 years now. I actually got into the field of domestic violence through my internship placement while I was in grad school, and have been lucky enough to be with Laurel House since.
Great, thanks. Where did you go to graduate school?
Temple.
Great.
I didn't want to, throw that in.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we do have an MSW program starting in the fall, but we didn't before, so don't worry about that. Tasia, say a little bit about yourself.
My name is Tasia Scott. I am a BSW candidate at LaSalle University, and I am a student social worker at Laurel House. Growing up in an inner city community really opened my eyes to some of the injustices dealt with, especially, within vulnerable populations. And that's what drew me to social work, because I feel as though I am here to be able to make a change in the lives of vulnerable populations.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that makes sense, those connections, right? And that, Melinda, you would kind of get involved and have that field experience that was meaningful to you, and that you would continue. It's really great that you found a home in the work, and Tasia making that connection to, your background and stuff, I think is wonderful. That's what we do as social workers, right? So if you could tell us a little bit about Laurel House. How did Laurel House get started? How long ago did it get started?
Absolutely. So Laurel House is a comprehensive domestic violence agency serving individuals, families, and the community based in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. The agency the agency name was selected because of the beauty of the laurel, the Pennsylvania state flower. And it represents a victory for people who have taken the courageous first steps in reaching out to Laurel House in their efforts to build a violence-free life for themselves and their children. The agency's first program was a domestic violence shelter for abused women and their children, which was founded by the Women's Center in Montgomery County in 1980. And then in 1981, Laurel House was incorporated as an independent nonprofit organization. Since that time, Laurel House has been able to expand its programs and services to become a comprehensive domestic violence agency that it is today. In addition to our emergency shelter, Laurel House offers a 24-hour hotline, transitional housing, a children's program, both individual and group counseling, medical advocacy, legal representation and advocacy, crisis response, law enforcement collaboration, as well as community education and prevention efforts.
Wow. There's a lot there that you said. I mean, starting with the beauty of the laurel, I think that imagery is just so poignant, right? And very powerful. And that how it represents a victory, and movement towards a violence-free life. That's really profound. I think, I didn't know that about Laurel House, and I've done field visits there before. And then the list of services that you've given are also kind of very, very impressive. Can you, I want to talk about those services in a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit more generally first, and then we can go back to those. How do people find you, and how are you funded?
Okay, so we receive a lot of individual funding as well as funding through PCADV, which is the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. People normally, from word of mouth in Montgomery County, we're a very well-respected agency, and people will often refer donors and such to us through their experiences, whether it be through some of our fundraising events throughout the year, as well as maybe just a passion for helping survivors. Our services all begin with the 24-hour hotline. They would call there, and then from there, we would do an assessment to see what their emergent need was, whether it be emergency shelter, whether it be help with a PFA and getting that protection from abuse order in place, as well as the emergency shelter or just other resources, whether it be we have a lawyer that will help with custody as well as PFAs. So that initial phone call normally comes through our 24-hour hotline. We also do work closely with the police departments in Montgomery County. So we will sometimes have a referral directly from the police. And we have a program called our DART program, and that's the Domestic Abuse Response Team. And those people are able to go out and work directly with those survivors in those moments and helping, walk through the both the criminal case as well as the PFA if there's a need for one.
All right. So protection from abuse, right?
Yeah.
How do people know about your hotline?
So it's advertised in doctors' offices and hospitals. We have the website. If someone was to call the National Domestic Abuse Line, that they could get directed to us through that. And even just a quick Google search of domestic violence in Pennsylvania does provide our number.
That's really great. And the connection to a national service as well, because, you might have a family member who's concerned, right, from out of state. And so they might be able to, to help someone find a place who might not have access to the internet, for example.
Right, and we also do see that people will call the National Domestic Violence Hotline to get placement outside of their current location. So if they're in, Tennessee and want to flee and really want to establish safety somewhere else, that we will get those referrals coming in. Like, do we have any beds available for a family with 2 kids coming from out of state, so that they really can begin to build that distance part of the safety.
Okay, thanks. So, we know we're very much aware that reasons of confidentiality and anonymity, and we don't want to delve into the lives of people. That's private, right? People deserve their privacy. But if you could maybe tell us a composite story of, some of the things that you see and some of the issues that people kind of arrive with, or some of the things aside from domestic violence that people are dealing with in their lives that, you work with there at Laurel House.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do see the variety of clients. Domestic violence is something that does not just affect any one population. So we see, anybody from, a master's educated individual to someone that's been a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home parent their whole adult life. And, maybe they have only a GED or no high school diploma. We see women that have multiple children. We have families that come in, or individual women that come in without children. We love to focus on the fact that each person has an individual story, and their trauma and how they've responded to that trauma is going to be totally different. Tasia's been a pleasure to have with us this semester, and she's been working closely with some of our survivors. And I know she had some things she wanted to add there, so I'll let her add to that.
Great. You predicted what I was going to do next. So great.
So some issues that I've noticed myself are that housing seems to be one of the major issues dealing with domestic violence. Per research, the ability to obtain safe, secure housing is one of the major issues, and it plays a major role in an individual's ability to flee an abusive situation. And this can come from different reasons, and it might be that the abuser didn't allow them to find work to be able to make their own money, or maybe they just do not have enough money saved up to be able to, get their own housing and things like that. Another issue is affordability, or the lack thereof of affordable housing.
These are things that social workers that we talk about a lot when we talk about policy and, the many different situations, right? The intersectionality we talk about as well, right? That people have a number of things that, are going on in their lives, and a number of identities and issues. And we know that there isn't enough affordable housing in general across our country. And at the same time, there aren't enough jobs at livable wages to be able to pay for the housing that is there. And so that's got to be a real challenge for you all and kind of the work that you're doing.
We've been very lucky with the rapid rehousing program, starting that and really being able to help a survivor have their choice in what city they would live in, or which part of the county they would live in. And they really get to say, okay, I want a 1-bedroom, or I really need a 2-bedroom. And with the rapid rehousing funds, we're able to help them to pay their first, last, and security deposit, as well as financial assistance through that first year of the lease, while working closely with the case manager and housing stability coach to be able to then, set goals to increase their earnings and really be able to, at the point of their lease renewal, to be able to renew it without the financial assistance from our agency.
It is so wonderful, right? Because oftentimes people who are in need have to settle. And what you're saying, and that takes away people's dignity, and, we don't want to have to settle. And so what you're saying is, people are given a real choice, not a fake choice, right? A real choice. And that also, when we're dealing with trauma and things like that, that can be very helpful as well. Creating safety. The rapid response funding, is that federal, or is it a mix of federal and state?
Yes, we're funded through, it's funded through HUD and an ESG grant.
Okay, Great. And you've recently got it, but how long has that program been around?
Montgomery County has a rapid rehousing program that I'm not sure how long Your Way Home has been running it, but just recently we were able to get it for people that are specifically fleeing domestic violence. Traditionally, rapid rehousing runs for homeless people that are having experiences with homelessness.
I'm going to have to add that to my list of things to cover in class. because it, it is really important, and it is such a huge issue. People, if you don't have a stable place to live, it's tough to get a stable job. It's so many other things rely on housing. That's why the Housing First movement has been, I think, really successful, and I'm really glad for that.
In addition to what Melinda shared about the rapid rehousing program, one of the really great things that the program offers is the ability for individuals to exercise autonomy. Like you said, having that choice to, decide where they would like to live. And, as social workers, we know that, we have to let we have to be person-centered, and we have to model our work around what the needs of the client are, and what they feel their needs are, and how they feel that we need to move forward to help them.
That's beautifully said, right? That comes out of our code of ethics, right? The dignity and worth of the person. It's also about, human rights, our quality of life. Housing is a human right. Safety is a human right. And so, yeah, I think that's a very important point. Here's a little bit of a touchy subject. What if someone has children but has been unable to take the children with them for some reason? Are you able to work with them and try to get custody of the children for them?
Yes, we've had cases where women will opt, saying they're coming into shelter for safety for themselves and their children, but opt to maybe leave their children with a friend or family member so that they don't have to live in the congregate shelter with their children. And that, presents its own challenges, when there's, our shelter has 9 rooms, and essentially we can house 9 different families, and they share bathrooms and kitchens, as well as, the playroom and the library. So sometimes women will opt to come into our program and have their children stay with a friend or family member during their time in our shelter. While we are not a housing program, we are a safe haven. We do not guarantee any kind of housing coming into our program, but we do work closely with other housing programs to help women and males to secure safe housing for themselves and their children. If they do, maybe the abuser has, threatened to take custody of the children if she leaves, or try to make her look unfit. We do work, we have a staff attorney that will help them with custody and child support as well.
Because that could be re-traumatizing, right? There's a trauma on top of a trauma, and no one wants to ever be faced with having to make that decision, and all of the things that people could say about you, cruel things, but there is a need sometimes, right? It might be safer for the children for you to leave, right? It could be in the short term, at least, right? So that's great that you have that staff attorney that can work with people, and that there are other options often for people to where they can leave their children. You just talked about being a safe haven. Can you say a little bit more, either of you, about what that means, being a safe haven?
Yeah, so we love to welcome our families in. Obviously, with COVID-19, it's been a lot different in how we provide our services. But we do really give each, as Tasia said, it's individualized. Each survivor comes in, and how they've processed their trauma might be totally different. We could have 2 women in support group that have had very similar situations, and one is ready to, get out and get a job tomorrow, and the other really needs some time to process through everything. So we really do look at each individual and see what they want for their time in our program, and how it's really, they're the driver of the bus, as we say, and we're just there to help navigate it through with them, because each person really does have a totally different story.
That's great, the driver of the bus. Now I'm singing the children's song.
Right, the wheels on the bus.
That's a whole other issue, right? Hey, Tasia, can you walk us through a day in the life of a student social worker at Laurel House?
So as we know, most of us are, well, all of us are social workers. A day is different from, like, today is going to be different from tomorrow. It's also going to be different from what we experienced yesterday. And so that's actually one of the cool things about COVID, is that we've kind of found ourselves in, that position where we've had to bend, but also not break, which is really important for the work that we do. We have to be resilient. We have to be, able to be adaptable to different types of situations. And so, a day in the life at Laurel House can look different. I mostly provide case management for the housing participants. And so for me, that looks like doing whatever is needed to help that client that day. Sometimes I might, call a client and the client just needs to vent for an hour. I found myself in that situation. I've also found myself on a Zoom call for 2.5 hours, helping out with resume updating. And so it really was different. We go off of that individualized approach where, it depends. Like Melinda said, go back to to the bus. I like to think of it as we're like a GPS app. So the client, they're putting in where they want to go. And, we're just there along the way saying, hey, it's like Waze. Hey, there's a traffic jam, or, hey, there's, an accident. Maybe you want to go to the left, or, that kind of thing. Or, hey, there's a gas station coming up. If you need to make a stop. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of look at us as a GPS, where, the client is telling us where they want to go, and we're just really there along the way to help them. And so they might make a wrong turn, or they might say, I don't want to go on that street. I want to take this other road. We're just going to help. And all we're going to do is reroute, and, just always there to, look out for the client's best interest.
That's a great analogy, I think. Yeah. Because there are obstacles when we're going somewhere and our GPS is leading us and there's a traffic jam and it tells us to go somewhere else. So that happens to all of us, whether or not we're in a safe haven or not. It's a common human thing. So you gave, Melinda, you gave a long list of things and that you kind of the services that you offer. And I wasn't able to get them because I was just listening, and about children, about trauma. Can you choose a couple and tell us a little bit more, what kind of work do you do with the children, for example?
So we have a children's advocate who traditionally would provide that child care / activities while mom was either attending group or individual counseling. So now we've switched that all to Zoom. So she's working very closely with each of the families in both the shelter program as well as our transitional housing and rapid rehousing programs. And that can be anything from, talking with mom about potty training tips to talking to mom about, school avoidance for her 12 or 13-year-old, be baking a cake together via Zoom for a birthday. She's been doing a lot of meeting with the toddlers and being like, hey, can you find something in the room that's green? And really just trying to engage them. We have an amazing group of funders that help us with our children's budget. So we were able to get iPads for the kids. We were able to, get easels and art supplies and everything to them. We got some whiteboards and we're on Zoom with them and we're practicing writing letters on our whiteboards and easels and things. So we've really tried to adapt our services to, meet the needs and the safety of our survivors.
Great. That's great that you can do that and kind of try to keep somewhat of a schedule or something, that keeps them engaged.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit more about, both or either of you, about kind of the trauma and the responses to trauma and the kinds of things that you do with people to kind of help them work through that or learn to live with it.
So in regards to trauma, I find that it's really important to just be present with the client. Be present with them where they are. Obviously, everybody has different backgrounds and everybody has unique experiences. And so it's really important that if you have a unique experience, you're also providing unique treatment. And, just really being present is super important just to understand the client, find out what those needs are and find out from that client how they want to approach getting those needs met. Of course, domestic violence can elicit really traumatic experiences. And so it's really important for us as helpers to understand that and to work in a way that we're not further traumatizing the client. And so this could mean maybe they just don't want to talk about it that day, or, maybe they've came up with some kind of coping mechanism as a result of their trauma, and now it has carried over. And, maybe we're seeing that in our own, experience with the client. I've actually had this experience recently myself, where I noticed that sometimes might have like discrepancies in what one of my clients says, and after talking about it with Melinda, we kind of realized that maybe this is one of the coping mechanisms that she has. It seemed like maybe she likes to tell you what you kind of want to hear. She wants to like people please. And it kind of clicked that like, wow, if you're a domestic violence survivor, maybe after, X amount of time of, having to deal with an abuser who's, always questioning you and always finding something wrong with what you say, maybe you do over time start to kind of generalize that. And so, it's really important to have that understanding. Right. That we're dealing with people who have had traumatic experiences, and so that way we're not necessarily looking at everything from a negative perspective, but more so looking at, how have their experiences led us to where we are right now.
And those survival mechanisms are really important to be able to kind of keep, look at and understand, because then you can work with people to say, all right, how do we use that in a different situation, in a healthier, more positive way? So we don't have much time left, and I have a ton of questions more that I would love to ask you. The conversation's great, but I think what I want to ask first, in the little bit of time that we have left, what can people do to support the work that Laurel House does, to support the work that, maybe perhaps other domestic violence organizations are also, doing, maybe, if they're not from Montgomery County or close to there?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that we would suggest is that they can learn how to help educate others on domestic violence. They can make financial contributions to agencies that help to prevent domestic violence. They can participate in fundraising events. We have wish lists on like an Amazon wish list, so they could go directly to that. And that would, could be anything from, soccer balls and chalk to toilet paper and paper towels. They can advocate with the local legislation when there's things that need to get passed. And they can even volunteer. All of our volunteers go through a 45-hour direct service training so that they can understand some of the, power and control, as well as some of the issues that might arise when you're working with a survivor.
Thanks so much. I want to thank you both, really, Melinda and Tasia, for being with us today and for working with us on this program and educating us, right, and sharing the amazing and important work that you're doing, right, with people who really are suffering, but who can get a bright future. And, want to thank the people watching, and we're going to be wrapping up our show today. And, we hope that if you can reach out to both the Salvation Army's Human Trafficking Program or Laurel House, and to either get involved or to support in some way the work that they're doing.
Laurel House is a comprehensive domestic violence agency serving individuals, families, and communities throughout Montgomery County and Pennsylvania. Their mission is to end domestic violence in each life, home, and community. To learn more or to donate, visit their website at laurel-house.org. If you need help, you can call their 24-hour hotline at 1-800-642-3150 or text HOPE to 85511. The national domestic hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE.
Thank you.